let's get to Tucker. And again, like for folks who are joining us, we're making this post game free this week. We figured we had some stuff that we really want to make sure everyone was able to see. But if you want to support the show, you can join us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be taking questions. We'll probably be talking a little bit more about the Bernie thing in a little bit. We might prioritize Discord questions from patrons. But if people want to leave us a voicemail, 1940-289-7234, please keep them like a minute to 90 seconds if possible. And if they're longer, we might have to skip them or speed them up. But let's get to this Tucker one, Matt, because as I was saying when we closed the main show, in this moment where, you know, Bernie sort of is back down from this fight with the Democratic Party, when people are sort of looking for direction, I can't see that this movement right now, I do want to call it a movement, this tendency maybe right now to sort of tell lies and nonsense about the extreme anti-democratic and anti-immigrant and anti-worker right wing, trying to make this argument that those folks are actually our allies and the people we should be looking at. You know, one, it's like it's a really that position, in my opinion, Matt, is like a real denial of not only morality, but of just general politics. Because if the question in front of us right now is how can we build a movement that can win, and your analysis is that, oh, the Democratic Party is a party of the ruling class, we can't participate or fight with them because they'll betray us, I would say you're right. But then if your next step is, yeah, that's why we should be supporting the Republicans and the far right movement, no, you're literally doing the exact same thing, just in a way that might piss off some people you were formerly friendly with.
I mean, Tucker Carlson, particularly, like the idea that he represents an anti-imperialist, like it would be as problematic for me to say Chris Hayes does that, right? Like, right? Like Chris Hayes, these are, in other words, selling a corporate product on corporate cable news as some sort of like, you know, TV's trash. You shouldn't watch it. Like even Sam, who's on occasionally on Chris Hayes' show, like that is not a medium conducive to really fucking anything. Maybe they could break a story that puts pressure on a but they don't fucking have news staffs. It's all, you know, the hosts with a big budget performing the news. So like, people shouldn't watch it. I tell my mom, like, don't watch that shit. So like and she'll like occasionally say like, oh, you know, it's like these type of people that think like, oh, I'm watching MSNBC, I'm watching Fox, and I'm watching CNN. It's like, don't watch none of that. Like that as a medium, I think it's just all trash. So the idea that Tucker himself, a guy, we've talked about this with Robert Skvarla, who, you know, cut his teeth in the 90s talking about how Gary Webb was lying about the CIA connections to drug running across the border, is now going to be some sort of anti-imperialist. I mean, we know this is we should know this is silly. And, you know, if you don't know, some folks like look, like there was people portrayed in a lot of ways when I was like trying to learn about this shit in like the mid 2000s, you know, and I partied a lot. I used to follow Matt Iglesias as somebody who had an eye on the economy. Okay. So like, but this is a simulated, sort of product, a corporate product that is simulating something that's really needed in society, which is people who are willing to like expose the sort of way America pursues its priorities across the globe. That is necessary. That is not something Tucker does at all.
No, not one bit. And like, let's get into it a little bit. Everybody knows at this point because it was fun when it happened. I mean, that shit blew up immediately. Tucker no longer at Fox News. And I will just say this right at the top that, like, you know, a lot of these pathologies, I think, were people who were progressive or sort of like pro Bernie. Like the 2016 campaign, I think, broke a lot of people's brains into like one very specific critique as to why it didn't happen. And that critique was, we didn't have left wing CNN, so like what we needed was left wing CNN, and then we would be in power, right? Like there's like a fixation with some folks on corporate media and cable news, and as we say, like this stuff can be like a problem. It has an effect, but unfortunately, like the reasons Bernie doesn't win are much more fundamental than just that we didn't have like a pro Bernie propaganda arm, and I think it drove people into a lot of very weird kind of politics.
Also, Trump won, like, not because CNN decided to give him free media. Like, he got free media because he's really entertaining, and America is set up to want entertainment.
Yeah.
And CNN is an entertainment product. So, and, like, people forgot that.
Yeah, I mean, these are all. That's the thing. At the end of the day, too, is like these are corporations that sell a product, which is fundamentally an entertainment product. So let's get into this a little bit. I promise y'all, this is not going to be the entirety of the segment. We're going to get to the man himself, but let's just play this as an example of somebody who is way too starry-eyed about this gentleman and Fox News in general.
Who's a personal friend.
You know how they say you can't watch Tucker Carlson, and the reason why they say that, by the way, is because he's effective in joining populist left and populist right together to fight against the imperialist wars. And so that's horrible. They can't ever do that. Wow. Democrats turning to Fox News more than they're turning to CNN and MSNBC. This is quite a story, which is why you haven't heard it.
Wait, what? Who cares?
Because it's actually important and shows you that they're losing the narrative. And so what is their response to losing the narrative? Double down on calling their enemies liars and white supremacists, doubling down on turning against workers, and ignoring the story. That's how they handled it. And now you know.
We can leave it there. So, all right, we're not making this about him. We've done a whole thing on him. Let's get a sense of what that message was. You know what? Up top, we're going to do this one because I think this is one of the more damning Tucker Carlson clips ever. We're going to play this, and I will play this really fast because I think people should hear it and remember this in what we're talking about. But I'll accept maybe an argument from that side as to why maybe we could ignore this after. But let's just play this for a second. This is Tucker Carlson talking about the Iraq War. Probably one of the most defining moments. If you're older, like Matt and I were both really young when this started, but like that defined our youth and our first awareness of politics.
Yeah.
It's a touchstone in American politics. It matters what side you were on that fight. And I think it's not digging up dirt to say, what did people say about this? Well, here's what Tucker said about this.
Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys. But I just have zero sympathy for them or their culture, a culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks.
And the way they treat women, I agree with you. Their culture is, but you're in their homeland, and you're over there as an American who they hate, and they want nothing more than the Americans off of their soil. So they're not going to play games.
They can just shut the fuck up and obey, is my view.
How could you salvage Iraq at this point?
I don't, it's beyond our control. I mean, if somehow the Iraqis decided to behave like human beings or something, he'd need to say, look, I'm a bigot, okay? I'm a bigot. I don't like Islamic extremists. Like, if you are really heavily into Islam, I'm sorry, I don't care for you that much. And I don't care what that sounds like. You can call me a racist. You can tell me whatever the fuck you want.
And at this juncture, you could say that and not catch a lot of shit for it.
You certainly could. I'd vote for you if you said that. White men have, they've contributed some, I would say, like creating civilization and stuff. I think they've done a pretty, I don't know, whatever.
Obama would kick your ass playing basketball.
Yeah, of course he would. Play basketball? Come on.
He's black. Say it. He's a real brother. Hey, do you think?
I don't know how black he is. How is he black? For one thing, he has one white parent, one black parent.
Well,
so that makes him. Why isn't he white? There's some really good, immigrants. I just think it's, people who come to this country ought to have something to offer. Be hot, be really smart. You know what I mean?
All right.
Charisma.
I mean, across the spectrum. I mean, some of the more contemptible stuff. But I don't share this opinion, but let's just play this out for a second. Mm-hmm. Well, that was Tucker back in the day. I will say, all the kind of claims about his racial attitudes, particularly about immigration. I mean, people sometimes say oh, well, Tucker is sort of mirroring a Trump-ist thing and sort of changed his colors on that. I don't know. That's pretty consistent. And yeah, he was on a shock jock show or whatever.
Very fluently speaking in like
very
I'd say, like,
fluently speaking in
if not, what do they call it? What's the Nazi message board?
was it
Daily
4HM or
Stormer.
whatever? What?
Daily Stormer.
Oh yeah,
Like
Daily
if
Stormer for
not
sure.
that, but like maybe a kick down. Like that those sorts of that really rolled off the tongue.
Yeah, no, they did roll off the tongue. All right, but again, the Doors, the Greenwalds will say, well, he's changed, right? He's changed. Things have moved. He's realized. He has that clip saying, "I didn't realize I was participating in this nasty shit." Let's
What the
zoom in.
private school education,
No,
the in
he's a
Switzerland.
fancy boy, like through and through. Let's
Yeah, he
just
went to a
play.
Swiss boarding school. Just for people didn't know, like you needed more education. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, it's like as disgusting as possible, and like it's one of those things that's not even worth like responding to. But like, so let's remember he's like talking about Iraq, right? So the justification for Iraq was that they were fighting against like a threat to the region and to democracy and all this kind of stuff. I mean, at this point, he's making it out to be about bringing civilization, fighting Islam, right? I mean, like that's as clear as it gets.
That was the dividing line at the time, and like you said, this was I tried to date somebody who was firmly on the other side of that question, including had a father who was a vet, and did not work out in part because like there's a huge tension about that stuff that just like people weren't able to put their maybe people should have been able to, but like it was like there was no other issue that was even remotely as salient or awkward.
Oh yeah.
The Iraq War.
So, anyways, so what those folks, the people who are like, oh, Tucker's now reformed and changed, will say is that like now he's an anti-imperialist voice, now he's a populist voice, now he's challenging the corporate media and he's challenging the Republican Party and he's doing all this kind of stuff differently now. I don't agree with that position at all. One, because of the facts, and two, Lord in heaven, I think I need a little bit more of an apology and kind of um, walking back of that kind of shit. We're not going to be able to go through all of the other things that Tucker said about like Black Lives Matter, about like even immigrants, though he will be talking about them because he always talks about them in these two things. I wanted to focus on two of the major issues that the folks who say that, oh, maybe Tucker will be an ally these days, focus on. One is going to be anti-imperialism, which we'll get to in a second. And the other one is something that some of these folks make a big deal about how they're the only ones truly fighting for this, and that is Medicare for all. Here is how Tucker responded to Kamala Harris's endorsement of some form. Remember, she put out this weak ass Medicare for all during the 2020 campaign, right? So not even like the good one. Let's hear how Tucker responds to Medicare for all in this circumstance.
To say we are the only industrialized nation in the world that does not offer universal health care.
But the question is I get it. I get it.
All
I'm not
have
arguing,
illegal immigrants.
But
all
I'm
of them.
not on the scale that we do. I'm not aware of any industrialized country that has over 20 million people within its borders illegally and is asking for more.
Are we just uniquely incapable of providing universal health care? Is that what it is?
To the world?
Not to the world.
Yes,
to the Kamala Harris is advocating for health care for Americans.
No,
that's what she said. She said that repeatedly.
She has said that universal health care should apply to people here illegally.
Medicare for all is health care for Americans. That's what she's advocating.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true.
If we can spend $1 trillion on our
military,
just for Americans.
Sorry, Jimmy Dore would agree with everything Tucker said there. You could get Jimmy Dore to make the exact same stipulations and say, fuck that. But I'll talk to this. We're talking to Nicole. I was in France 4 years ago or something like that on a vacation. Person I was with got sick. Went to the hospital overnight. Tests the entire night, hospital bed. Ran the test, got the test back 12 hours later. $0.
Yeah.
That's fucking civilization. You want to talk about spreading civilization? That's civilization.
Totally. No. I mean, that 100%. I mean, also like the morality, like behind, I mean, like this is like almost a tedious argument, but like, Lord, I mean, this is what the experience is for people. You come to this country, you get sick on vacation or something like that. You're fucked, right?
Sick.
saying like that's the face that we want to put on our country to the rest of the world. I find that to be pretty nasty. But I think even more important, is saying that the people in this country who do tremendous amounts of labor and our neighbors and our friends and part of our community, saying they should die of cancer, they should die of treatable medical problems. I mean that's as nasty and disgusting as it gets. Here's Tucker again talking about Medicare for all, in an interesting way.
If you're a middle class person who can barely afford to get sick, who is struggling, for example, as so many are, to pay the premiums on your health insurance, imagine what they're telling you. They're saying that people who aren't from here, who have no right to be here, who are breaking our laws by their presence, get ahead of you in line? Huh. That's just the beginning, by the way. At various other times, the Democratic candidates have told us they want to put hundreds of thousands of criminals back onto the streets. They bragged about decriminalizing all illegal border crossings. They've embraced the most aggressive form of identity politics, as well as the weirdest kind of gender theology. They've relentlessly attacked America as evil and described a person's worth as defined by gender and skin color, the opposite of the American dream. They've endorsed taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. Here's Beto O'Rourke.
All right, and we'll skip the Beto. Look, Tucker is smart enough to know that he can't attack Medicare for all in the way that he might want to.
Right.
This is the classic right-wing move, is knowing that, Republican policies like aren't popular in the sense of like what they want to really do with the economy and with labor. Like they don't run on child labor, right? They pass that shit, but they don't run on it, right?
Right.
They mobilize around some kind of bigotry, some aggrievement, all that kind of stuff. So it's not surprising that Tucker is spending his time on his incredibly popular cable news show, as we'll get to in a second with Glenn Greenwald, right? The most watched cable news show in the country, attacking Medicare for all.
Sorry, yeah. And just on the numbers, I'm looking this up. Like there are countries with comparable members of undocumented folks. United States, 15. This is more than he says. This 52 million immigrants. It says 15% of the population. Germany has 18% of the population. What kind of healthcare do they have? The United Kingdom, 14% of the population. So is that 1%? 14% of the population you can do it, but 15% of the population you can't. It's just a Nazi getting in the way, splitting people to try to say we can't do healthcare is feasible. Really protecting like the people that he gets dinner with in fucking Florida, like George Bush, who don't want to raise their taxes to pay for it. And absolutely, there's plenty of money around to where we
the white glove service that they get.
Exactly. And there's plenty of money that you could shake out of those suburbs to pay for anybody who comes in. You don't even need to check the fucking papers before you say, yeah, I'll take that knife out of your stomach.
Yep. So look, the Medicare for all one, like, is that surprising to most of our audience? Probably not. But I think it's worth remembering when people talk about this alliance between whatever Tucker Carlson's politics are and like the left. Remember what Tucker Carlson's politics are. And like, again, like we could do this entire segment and just focus on the racism and the bigotry and the hatred and all the stuff that he spews. And I'm not saying that's not important, but I want to just get to the crux of that argument and say that like, if you're somebody who says, I'm the real person advocating for Medicare for all, and I'm saying we should be lining up with this fella, you are full of shit. You are full of shit. Now let's get to this other one, which is the anti-imperialism of Tucker Carlson. And maybe to introduce this argument that like we can be building this alliance, we'll bring on Mr. Glenn Greenwald, who is pretty much, made a career pivot to doing this full time, effectively.
Yeah. His show is about little else than dissent, not from the establishment Democrats, but from the establishment Republicans. And they're
all right. We're just going to pause that again. Like, we made this point that like, look, we played the stuff from his past. I think it's pretty damning, but like, again, like we'll give them the argument if they want to say like, oh, Tucker's changed, blah, blah, blah. We just played here's like Tucker Carlson was just talking about Medicare for all, and he's saying we can't do Medicare for all because there's too many illegal immigrants. Matt, is that very different from mainstream Republican talking points? I mean, it's ludicrous to say that.
No, I mean, and also like fucking Joe Manchin might say that. Like,
So yeah. So anyways, we're moving on from the Medicare for all to talk about imperialism, which is the new one that people are focusing on.
sure.
Of endless war and militarism and corporatism. He not only expresses and advocates, but constantly airs the kind of dissent that left liberals in the United States falsely tell themselves they represent. There is no dissent, no dissidence in the mainstream left liberal wing of the Democratic Party, thanks to Bernie Sanders and AOC. It exists only in the...
That's a good throw in there too, which I think like really reveals.
That's his preoccupation.
Yeah.
It's that it exists on the right, but doesn't exist on the left.
Look, and we'll talk about it later. Like we are all in agreement here generally that like this endorsement of Biden from Bernie sort of shows that the steam, the engines run out of steam on some of these things. But that's a long way away from saying that AOC and Bernie Sanders, their role is basically in silencing dissent from the left, which is like a claim, like, more often than not, if we talk about AOC in particular, Matt, on this program, it's usually to say like there are like significant issues with her politics and her worldview, right? That like, and these things come from, and we make this point all the time, not from some kind of cynical, sinister plot to like deliver progressives or democratic socialists into the Democratic Party, but because, in AOC's case, for example, this is somebody who's like sort of with their movement, but it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like this is somebody who was a member of the DSA, for a short period of time before they got elevated to Congress. And that's not because she was cynical or sinister. It's actually because there was so much mobilization and opportunity at that moment to do something different that like people shot a fucking cannon off thinking that it was just going to go 5 feet in front of them, and it went over the moon, right? Like she's an incredibly popular, well-known politician who defeated an incumbent in a thing that was happening all across this country at that time, where left groups and DSA chapters were saying, we're going to throw a challenge into the establishment and we'll probably lose, but we're going to just do it. AOC was one that just, it struck gold. The problem that ended up happening with that is like, well, this is somebody whose relationships with that movement aren't as rooted and deep as we would want. That movement wasn't as rooted and deep as we would want with the working class. So we have somebody who's willing to do certain things which are good. Like I still will come out here and say that I think it's wonderful that the Squad and Greg Casar now came out and wrote that letter in support of Julian Assange, right? A political prisoner who Biden is trying to torture for exposing American war crimes, right? I think that's a great thing that we have people in Congress who can do that. Right. I also found it to be one of the most devastating, disappointing moments when those people, a lot of those people, except for Rashida Tlaib, voted to block the rail strike, right? We make those criticisms on this program all the time. But the difference between the criticism that we're making and the one that Glenn's making and the one that Door's making and others make is that for them, it's like, oh, this is a plan versus this is a very clear example of the limitations of, as Glenn said, a kind of left liberal progressive politics, right? That sometimes is called democratic socialism, but like, anyway, so like, understand there are limitations there, right? But there's a big difference between saying this is like cynical, it's a plot, there's a motive behind it, there's like a idea to sort of block the left, versus saying like this is something that happened, we were just shooting shots and hoping that something was going to work out, and something really worked out in a big way, and now we're like the limitations are very clear on that, right? It's really important because what is the message that you get from that criticism is that doing mass politics is bad, participating in politics is dangerous, that everyone's out to get you, instead of saying like, oh, well, organizationally, structurally, like we need to be thinking differently about how we can sort of mobilize and motivate politicians to stand with these movements, instead of sort of shooting people off and hoping later that they then reflect our politics and our ideas.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And like the reason I really Glenn I find really insincere at this point, because if he really was as interested in this, it wouldn't be just to take swipes at the squad, which we again agree has limitations, but it would point out like, hey, actually, who was there for Matt Gates's Syria war power stuff like a month ago? It was like squad, and it's like, yeah, they're not perfect, but like this idea that it might not exist on either party. Like we want it to exist. We're breathing on the embers as much as possible with regards to the squad, trying to get that to go, right? The idea that you would say like
No, this is a
that
good
is
point.
the idea that you'd say like, no, that's pointless. There's actually some embers over here we're going to
With
really
Marjorie
blow on.
Taylor Greene and Matt
Yeah.
Gaetz and Tucker Carlson. Yeah, no, it's nonsense.
Like, please, I'm sorry. I'm just going to go fucking, dig a hole and wait to die if that's the case.
But he's made his point, but in fairness, let's give him his full go.
Right, among the people who were shaped by the Trump campaign, and it was anchored in the media by Tucker Carlson and his program at 8 p.m. And removing Tucker Carlson from the airwaves doesn't just mean that Fox is removing the most popular host in the history of cable news, though it does mean that. It means that they are removing from the air the only person on television, on mainstream television, who would air dissent on a huge number of crucial issues. As I said, Laura Ingraham does it as well now. Jesse Waters does it sometimes. A couple other people on Fox do it. But in terms of just relentlessly and intensely forming his worldview based on increasing levels of radical dissent from establishment orthodoxy, there is no one on television who is doing what Tucker Carlson was doing. And it is almost impossible to believe that that didn't play a major factor in why he's gone.
Okay. I mean, is there anything you want to add to that before we get to the imperialism stuff?
No, I think that was exactly right. I agree with all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, there's a part of me that's just like it's tremendously sad to watch.
It is so sad, especially that bit, which is buttering up the other hosts of Fox News that are going to get him on now, which is like, okay, it does still exist there. It wasn't just Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Jesse Waters. I mean, this is, professional courtesy that Glenn is extending.
So let's get to this imperialism thing, because this is where they spend a lot of their time. And like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like Tucker has said some things about Assange.
Yeah.
Just like, generally like that's good in the sense that like, I think it's a travesty that there is a segment of this population that is so rabid and willing to want to see a journalist being tortured for doing journalism and exposing American war crimes. Because I will just say this right quick. I hate to have to say this. This has nothing to fucking do with Hillary Clinton, the reason that Biden and the US government is trying to torture her. What the case is about, like, this is what it says in it. It is because Julian Assange had information that he published from whistleblowers and leakers that showed, for example, American soldiers brutally murdering people, right? In the most callous and disgusting way, in a way that should make you be ashamed to be an American, right? I mean, something that like really should rock you to your core, and you should want to see shifted and broken that power, that nastiness that our country does, and the devastation that we unleash on other people. Nothing to do with Hillary Clinton, and of course everyone wants to talk about that solely, but like, let's just be clear about what that was. So fine, like if Tucker wants to come and maybe get some of those folks to start to say no to that, that's helpful in the sense that like, I want to see Julian Assange not be tortured and in prison.
But it'd be nice in that case to like give some props to the squad instead of constantly.
Yeah, no, well, they will never do that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, well, Tucker, the guy who was just saying that he thinks Iraqis are monkeys, like literally is what he said.
Yeah.
He's good, but these other members of the squad who we make criticisms of from time to time on different things, they are like the embodiment of evil and nastiness, right? Like, so yeah, what I'm saying is not, yeah, anyway, like, it's just like, it's nonsense, the standards here, right? And like, let's get to Tucker Carlson's anti-imperialism. Because just like we said about Tulsi, right? Because remember people were doing this with Bernie, saying Bernie is not an anti-imperialist. Tulsi Gabbard, of all fucking people, somebody who recently was doing like missions for the United States military in Africa, is the true anti-imperialist, which is nonsense. The same thing is true about Tucker Carlson, because his worries about American imperialism is not that America is doing imperialism, not that America is sort of stoking the flames of war, and trying to make, for example, like the Russia-Ukraine conflict worse, right? Is that he thinks our resources are being directed in an unstrategic way and are ignoring the real enemy. Watch. By the way, Tucker Carlson, radically different from the Republicans, Matt. Who's the number one enemy of Donald Trump, right? China. So here's Tucker Carlson talking about Russia. And let's hear what he has to say on the situation. Shout out to Ben Norton. We're borrowing both these clips from him that he pulled out, who's been doing really great work, I think, across the board in the past few months. Yep. Let's put this up.
Russia is not America's main enemy, obviously. No sane person thinks it is. Our main enemy, of course, is China. And the United States ought to be in a relationship with Russia aligned against China to the extent that we can. China is the country that's currently, right now, murdering tens of thousands of Americans every year with fentanyl. It's depopulating parts of the country. It's pushing our life expectancy down. That's how profound a threat this is. It's coming from China, and our elites barely care. They won't even acknowledge it. In fact, many of our politicians run interference for the communist government of China instead.
The communist government of China, that's something that the right never says, actually. You know what? Like, that's true. It's great that Tucker Carlson is finally standing up and breaking from the right-wing mainstream media and the GOP and talking about communist China, something I've never heard them talk about before.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. And meanwhile, like blowing any sort of American complicity for the opioid crisis in terms of like, what are we doing to set people up to the point where they're using drugs like this to kill themselves? Like, I agree, we should stop fentanyl from coming over the border, whether it comes from China or wherever. That doesn't include saying, actually, it's coming over here on the backs of people looking to make a better life or to, work for a wage that they technically for them or whatever. That's what really, like, this fentanyl thing. Fentanyl's a problem and people die because of it. And then we have an entire party grandstanding that actually it's the people coming in across the Rio Grande or like people looking to be refugees. Like they're the ones bringing it in.
The fentanyl.
No, it's smuggling operations.
Yeah.
Idiots, like across the border.
Well, that gets it, close to home in the sense that like Abbott's whole border operation is saying we have to stop people from bringing COVID-19 into Texas, which fuck off. Fucking Governor Abbott talking about being worried about COVID-19. And yeah, we are trying to stop fentanyl from coming into Texas, right? That's what Greg Abbott's always going on about. It's like, no, they're harassing migrants, right? And like you see this with the billions of dollars. We spent billions of dollars in the state, Matt, in a state that has, a massive teacher shortage, massive poverty rate, the highest uninsured rate in the United States. We're spending billions of dollars for Abbott to run parallel border operations to the United States government to stop fentanyl from coming into Texas. And what is there to show from it? I mean, anytime they catch anything, they make a big stink about it. But like the vast majority, we're talking like 2% of these stops and these harassment operations that they're doing have anything to do with fentanyl coming into the U.S. And if Abbott was worried about fentanyl, he should be doing things like providing testing strips for free for folks, like doing all these kind of like dangerous,
state public health measures.
State public health measures that, like, there's some mobilization around that right now. They might do it, but like it's 2023, right? And he's been talking about this for 4 years now, right? And now maybe in this ledge session something will be done about it, right? It's nonsense. And again, big difference. Fuck. Tucker Carlson is willing to take a stand that the GOP is not willing to take. One, like, we know it's nonsense about like China on the national level. Right here in Texas, in the ledge right now, it looks like they're going to pass a bill to stop Chinese nationals from owning property in the state of Texas. Right? Again, I think that's nasty. particularly in the state of Texas that has a city like Houston, which is the New York City of our time, in the sense that, like, if you're somebody coming to America right now, you aren't going to New York for the most part. People are moving to Houston. I think that's a great part of the city, actually, that, Houston really is like this place where people are landing. But when you start doing that stuff about nationality, that means you're waging war on Texans, people who live here, preventing nice, sweet, grandmothers from buying a house or a condo or something like that. I mean, it's nasty. It's jingoistic shit. I bring that up just to say that. So what's this argument here about Tucker being the only one to break from the Republican Party on these kind of things? The Republican Party is rabid on China. Let's just play this last Tucker bit that we have. Same subject, but let's hear him out, because maybe that was a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
If Russia ever joined forces with China, American global hegemony, its power would end instantly. You'd have the world's largest landmass and largest natural gas reserves allied with the world's largest population and world's largest economy. So a Russia-China axis would be not just more powerful than the United States, but much more powerful. It would have the scale to control a lot of the world's economy and trade routes and raw materials. It could project military force that, posturing aside, we actually don't have the power to stop. If Russia and China ever got together, it would be a brand new world, and the United States would be greatly diminished. Most Americans agree that would be bad.
So again, it's imperial war. I mean, what is this conflict that he's setting up then? Like the most clear example of American imperialism. American hegemony would be over. Name me like any anti-imperialist worth their salt who's talking about, like, we got to preserve American hegemony.
Yeah, I mean that's like he's like admittedly to the left of maybe a certain type of Republican orthodoxy going back, but to the right of Henry Kissinger, right? Like, right, like Henry Kissinger was criticized by Republicans because he was too open to China and Russia. But he was doing it for the same reasons Tucker's saying. Like, you want to kind of play those two off each other. But Tucker's like actually on a question of China particularly, he's to the right of Kissinger. So yeah, I mean, well done. I'm glad we have options in the aisle of cable news now.
It's just insane. Is it true, as we talk about on this program, and it's unpopular when we do, Max, we run up against folks, that, for example, there is a rabid saber rattling aspect of like the MSNBC crowd when it comes to Russia? Yes, it's bad. It's very dangerous. Is the answer then we should pivot to war with China? No. And anybody who is saying that the reason that they think that Tucker Carlson is a worthwhile voice is to maybe prevent conflict and war, and then they're full of shit when Tucker Carlson is not saying, hey, I don't think that America should be able to dictate to the world what they do. Tucker Carlson is saying very clearly that he's not worked up about the fact that America is a hegemonic power, that America exploits the global South, that America prevents tremendous amounts of social progress because it wants to continue exploiting certain parts of the world. No, that's not Tucker Carlson's criticism, right? Which would be like the anti-imperialist criticism. Tucker Carlson's criticism is, we've picked the wrong bad guy, and we just need to change our energies as to who we are demonizing and attacking. Look, I might be different from the rest of y'all, but that don't sound like no anti-imperialism that I've ever known in my life.
Yeah, and I think to bring Greenwald back into it, like Tucker was also fomenting a coup in Brazil.
Let's not forget that.
I hope this. Let me know if this doesn't, because I wasn't able to download this beforehand, but I'll try to play from it anyway. This is from Tucker. Went down to Brazil to do some reporting on how could Bolsonaro be a dictator who's planning on not to leave office afterwards when some of the media doesn't like him. Here is this section here. Raise the volume.
In the eyes, the dots in the eyes, or the dots on the eyes, and they're excellent. They really showcase the good things going on in this country.
flattering, will admit that not speaking Portuguese could be a hurdle in the largest Portuguese-speaking country in the world. But to the question of free speech, which really is the acid test, do you have free speech or don't you? Well, it's a really simple test. You have free speech when you can say something that most people consider offensive or outrageous, a view that is held by very few people, and not be punished for saying it. That's what...
Now, I'm sorry, I have to stop there. That's one of the most revealing things Tucker has ever said. That the threat, the free speech threat, it doesn't come from the state or the Democrats. It comes from actually people you might offend. It comes from the mob.
Yeah.
That is a very elitist conception of free speech.
No, that's populism, right, Matt?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. What a populist. And actually, you'll never guess who appears right after that.
Free speech when you can say something that most people consider offensive or outrageous, a view that is held by very few people, and not be punished for saying it. That's what free speech is. Does Brazil have free speech? Well, earlier this year, perhaps the most popular podcaster in the country, a guy known as Monarch, played out a thought experiment on his show. And
we'll skip that because Brad Mears talked about Monarch. We've talked about that with him, but I don't want to get into that minutia.
Yeah.
But he's
here for 17 years. He's an independent journalist with an emphasis on independent, and he joins us tonight with his assessment. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. So I was really struck. There's so much about Brazil that's amazing and impressive, and I understand why you moved here. But the question of free speech, media freedom, how does that stand, would you say, now in Brazil?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of living in a foreign country for a while is that you see some of the flaws of your country, but you also see a lot of the really good sides. And one of the things that exists in the United States that doesn't exist in a lot of other countries, including Brazil, is a more pluralistic media than is available in a lot of other places,
Yes.
even if it's...
Yeah, I mean, so there's Glenn. Earlier in that segment, Tucker called Lula a criminal, a convicted criminal. So nice of him to make that appearance.
You have a point that I want you to make about what this means for right-wing media, but let me just say this really fast. We said all this stuff about Tucker Carlson, right? And how he's bad. Is that an endorsement of CNN or MSNBC? No. Rather, it's for people who are thinking that, like, oh, we're getting airtime on these programs to say certain kinds of things, means that there's some new opening in American discourse for certain kinds of ideas that have been foreclosed or denied for a long time, is wrong. Tucker Carlson wants you on those programs so that he can make this point that, like, look, we are part of this new vanguard of folks who are saying no to the mainstream. Well, again, I've never understood the argument that Tucker Carlson is the most popular host in the country as being some kind of endorsement for his truth telling, right? No, Tucker plays a very specific role. If you think that the system is corrupt and your argument for why somebody's telling the truth is that a lot of people watch their thing, you should maybe be asking yourself why something like that is allowed to be on a platform which is owned by some of the most powerful people in the world. It's because what Tucker Carlson is doing is creating a false binary for folks so that they can feel like they're challenging some kind of big systems and yet end up in the same place as a lot of other folks. Got to fight China. We can't have Medicare for all. We can't have anything better, right? There's a reason that Tucker Carlson has been tolerated for as long as he has. And it is false to sit here and act like the reason he is being silenced is because he was telling too much truth for the people at the top.
Yeah. And, my thing is, I saw a lot of folks really greeting this as like the Saddam statue coming down or something and I got to say, like, if you have somebody who was in your family who was a nightly Tucker watcher, I think probably this will be a slight improvement. But I gotta say, like, don't be surprised if a few months from now they're just watching Jesse Waters.
Oh yeah,
right. Like, and this is at Not a Big Jerk. Lauren put this on Twitter.
It's great.
Exactly, and this puts the numbers to how my initial reaction. Like Robert F. Kennedy doing the same shit. Fox fires Tucker Carlson 5 days after he crosses the red line by acknowledging that the TV networks pushed a deadly and ineffective vaccine. Yeah, is vax bullshit. And Lauren says, this really just shows how irrelevant modern cable TV has become. 3.5 million viewers, while great for 2023, would have placed his show around the 116th most watched program of 2002, right around Whose Line Is It Anyway, and just behind Smallville. No one cares anymore. And like, I really think like it is like,
yeah, no, that is a good point.
it is like leading up to World War One and being like, who has the best wooden ships? Like, and it's like, look, like we got a new wooden ship, but I don't know if that's really going to win the battle. And like, this has been diffused, and Tucker isn't so much the like Hitlerian Machiavelli. I don't think. I think he's probably peaked here. I think he was a symptom of a sort of, and maybe a savvy one in the way he was able to play certain
I think
things.
he's savvy. I think that's fair to say.
But I don't think like this
Doesn't mean he's telling the truth. It just means he knows how to play a role.
He knows how to play it well, and Tucker was online. Like I've spoken with people who know leftists who got a call from Tucker to he wanted to suss out their criticism of the Democrats, and weren't invited to make that criticism of themselves on the show, but saw that Tucker regurgitate it on the show later. And that's effort that Hannity doesn't put in. Hannity isn't calling up Claremont Institute nerds when they get in hot water for defending Nick Fuentes. Like, but I just think like, this, the GOP, like Tucker, I do think like Fox News to the extent like, and it's true of MSNBC to an extent, like they are organs of these parties. But I think you can overstate the significance of one of these individuals. I think it's like basically these institutions have been deteriorating in significance for our entire lives, and we don't adjust our sort of models for that very well as it's going.
Yeah. No, it's not good, folks. Very bad. Yeah, so good riddance to Tucker. I think you're right, Matt, that this isn't going to be a real big shift in anything. And it's childish of me, but like sometimes you wish there would be some kind of reckoning for folks who are promoting a lot of this nonsense. But unfortunately, the only thing that will be a reckoning for them is if we can change the power dynamics in this country.
If we extend healthcare to anybody regardless of citizenship.
Yeah.
That's yeah.